but things that you may not take into consideration when doing a press release that will give you an edge is like telling your story.
This is Girl Take Note, a podcast for women who are looking to turn their dreams into reality. Hey, Mickie, welcome to Girl Take Note podcast. How are you?
Good. Glad to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be a good conversation because I want to talk about PR, press releases, because I think it's so different now. Like I used to work in PR way back in the day. So I used to work in PR, started out, and now I'm like, it's completely different today. So I'm really excited about having this conversation and us jumping into this.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So can you share like maybe some of your backstory on what did you see missing in the market 25 years ago when you decided to create eReleases for small businesses?
Right. So, I guess around 27 years ago, I'd finished a graduate degree in creative writing, and I ended up at a telecom research startup as employee number 3. So I was having to do a lot of things, of which writing press releases and faxing them out was one of them. And I did a few, and not much happened. And we were publishing data, so I put together data tables and stuff like that. And what I realized looking at articles that were out there is journalists like a story. And I wasn't really giving them the ingredients for a story. I was just giving them a bunch of data. And so I started looking at anomalies and reporting on, what was behind those anomalies. And, the first release I did was I had previously published the table of incoming and outbound traffic from the United States to several Caribbean countries. And this time I was going back to that same data, and there was one anomaly, one country that was like substantially more inbound and outbound traffic to the US than all the others. And I found out it was because that was a routing or a call center for 1-900 numbers, which were very popular at that time, where you'd call and get your horoscope for 50 cents a minute, and it would be charged to your phone bill. And you could get like advice on your pets and things like that for a certain amount per minute. So I rewrote that release, focusing on that aspect of it. And that release got picked up by Economist, Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and 3 trade publications. And so I was like, wow, that was different. And so I started doing other releases talking about the stories behind the data. And again, they got picked up again and again, and I saw how powerful it was. Now, some articles we would get, the phones would ring, would get sales. Sometimes we wouldn't. But you could never predict that. But it was probably driving more than half of our new sales was this earned media, which is what you call it when you get these articles written about you. And we started getting orders from new customers. All of our customers before that had been telecom companies and telecom attorneys and consultants in the telecom space. And all of a sudden we started getting orders from investment banks and hedge fund managers and places like that, because we had done a few releases about how telecom traffic often grows in double digits preceding economic growth. And they really liked those patterns and things like that. It was another area that they had not really explored. And so it was very valuable. And I felt like, wow, this is great. And all of a sudden I do more faxing, and I started to get phone calls saying, hey, could you email this to us in the future? And I was like, sure. And, light bulb for me, rather than program a fax machine, you can just, collect email addresses. And I mentioned it to my boss that, you could probably, build a business around that. And he said, you should consider it. So I spent about a year just getting journalist email addresses. And I originally was going to start in the technology space. And what I discovered was, as I was contacting journalists, they would move their beats, and all of a sudden they'd be covering something slightly different. And so I just started saying, I'll collect everybody. And so I was on bulletin boards, which were popular at the time. Nobody knows what a bulletin board is now, but a lot of journalists were on bulletin boards because, they were just exploring this new thing, the internet and email and all that. And so it was a very great time. And when I launched in October of 98, I had about 10,000 journalists in my Rolodex that they said
That's
I could send
awesome.
them releases. And so I did that for a few years. And then PR Newswire reached out to me and said, "Hey, we'd like to partner with you and have you the ability for you to send your releases out." And so today, all of our releases at eReleases go out nationally over PR Newswire. They charge about $1,600 to move a 600-word press release, and with us, it's about a third to 40% of the price. So it's a substantial savings if you go through us as compared to going directly through them.
That's so awesome. I wanted to talk about this conversation because I think one, I want you to probably tell people why press releases and PR is still important because we live in social media. Mickie, I feel like everything is so right now. Like we don't have to wait for nothing. We can get the news now. We get the updates now. We get everything now. Tell us how important PR and still press releases is, how important it is still in today's market.
So the really terrible thing for my business and the really good thing for my business has happened over the past few years is I started my business just emailing. And today you could never do that. What has happened over the past 25 years is the introduction of these media databases that you can just license for anywhere from, I see, $5,000 to $20,000 a year, depending on how many people have access to it. And if you want international as well. And so, when you got a golf club manufacturer that just paid, let's say, $15,000 for a media database, and they realize there's only 2,700 journalists interested in golf products, but yet there's like 500,000 contacts in this database, they start getting loose with who they should be sending it to. All of a sudden, they convince themselves that, hey, a lot of our customers are bankers and business professionals who golf. So let's send this to banking analysts and financial, analysts and journalists who report on banking. And the truth is, none of those people are ever going to write an article about golf clubs. But what has happened is, every journalist complains about it, is their inbox is like a landmine. It is so filled with off-targeted pitches and press releases that, people who know these journalists and have relationships with them often have to call and say, "Hey, just checking with you. Can you search your spam folder because it's probably there? We sent you a pitch." And so, and at the same time, newswires of press releases, of which there were 2, and then it became 3, and now it's back to 2 again. They were very expensive. Mostly publicly traded companies use them, but then with the internet, and they no longer were tied to very expensive transmissions like satellite feeds and wiring newsrooms and intranets and stuff like that. All of a sudden, it's just available on their website, and you can log in and look at an industry feed. You can actually customize it. So like if you cover fashion, but let's say you don't cover retail fashion, it's like high fashion, you can set up keywords to exclude if there's a press release with that. So you can look at a very tailored feed. And what's also happened is journalists who used to have the the luxury of writing 3 to 4 articles a week are now sometimes being expected to write 2 or 3 articles a day. And as a result, they don't have as much time to sift and hunt out stories. And so they go to the newswire. Unlike their email inbox, they know it's going to be very targeted, specifically for them, especially if they customized it for their industry. And in addition to that, there's only 2 places to fish. It's PR Newswire and Business Wire. The third wire sort of pivoted. That was Globe Newswire. Used to be a different name before that, but they just never got much use. Not many journalists were using them. And then as belts have tightened, journalists just don't have the time to go to a third place. So they pivoted and said, "Hey, if you're a publicly traded company and just want to meet disclosure and you'd really rather not journalists look too closely at your press release, use us, and we're a lot cheaper." So there are other wires that people are probably familiar with, but they're not wires of press releases like Associated Press, Reuters, UPI. I think there's probably a few others that are out there. Bloomberg. They write their articles in-house. They may use press releases and turn them into articles, but everything that they transmit is an article written by them. And the way it works is a newspaper pays a licensing fee. So rather than, a busy editor in Baltimore at 4:30 p.m. having to sit down and write an article on a Supreme Court ruling that just came out, they could just pull it off the Associated Press. There's a licensing fee arrangement, and that's how that works. But the fortunate thing is that in the U.S., most journalists are going to search in both wires, because it's like half of the releases are going to be in one and half the other. So you don't have to go to both of them. If you go to one, you're pretty much covered. But it makes them a lot more valuable. And we talked about, you had mentioned social media. The wire has opened itself up to social media. There are a lot of Instagram influencers in the world of fashion who will show images and photos of new fashion designs they pull directly from the press release, and it gives them immediate access unless they get, sometimes certain people get access before it hits the wire. But for everybody else, including a lot of these Instagram influencers, it's a great place to grab that. I follow a guy on TikTok called Snackalator, and each week he does a roundup of new products hitting grocery store shelves in the snack arena. And he says these images he pulls directly from the press release, and so these are social media that are using press releases, and I think that's really exciting because it's opening up the pickup that you can get from outside traditional print and TV and radio and magazines and things like that, so that you can get picked up on social media and have people report about you.
Yeah, that's so interesting to know that you're able to pull those images, almost like that exclusive images. You know what I mean? When something first comes, that you can pull those from those PR releases on those two sites. So that's good to know. I'm glad I know that.
Yeah, and I also, this goes to the point that images are a lot more important today than they've ever been in the past. And I don't see journalists using video yet. And I've talked to a few people about why that may be, but I think that will probably come out in a few years, where it'll be easily edited and adaptable and incorporated in the stories. But those images are very valuable because a lot of people are using them on social media platforms. They're putting them online on websites, and so if you have a really great image, it's going to get used. And it doesn't have to be the images of 15 years ago. 15 years ago, if you had a product, it had to be perfectly lit, blue velvet background, all that stuff. And now they know that people people prefer candid shots. They prefer seeing things that are way more natural. And so just using your phone, you can get really great images that you can incorporate and include with your press release. And it will give you an advantage, because if a journalist is looking at two press releases of, say, similar newsworthiness, but one has an image or two, they're going to gravitate to that because they know that's going to give them an advantage when they post that story online.
Yeah. Let me ask you this question. What would be considered press release worthy? What type of information would be? Because it's like, you don't want to just say, hey, I started a new plan today, guys. Here it is. You know what I mean? What would be press release worthy to be able to submit to those outlets to have it kind of spread nationwide?
So I would say it's probably, most of the press releases that I don't see. They should be a little important and strategic. They should tell a story in the same way that I talked about before. And so many people write press releases from a very selfish standpoint. It's like, we have something important to us and we just want to get a lot of pickup. And what you have to realize is that these journalists are acting sort of as gatekeepers, and they're trying to decide, is this message important enough that my audience is going to want to know more about it? And so they want information that's going to entertain or educate, and ideally both their audience. And so for that reason, take your press release, go back and say, what could I add to this that would make it more of a story? Journalists like a story arc. So what's more of that stuff? I get a lot of product launch press releases, and I get it. A new product is very important to your company, and it can be very newsworthy. But if you just have, here's our new product, here's a list of features, and here's a page to learn more and buy it. That's not a lot of, information to build out a story arc. But the thing that you can immediately do is put a use case study in there. I'm sure that you didn't release this product without people trying it. So, introduce someone who started using it, what their problem was, and then what the outcome was, and get a quote by them talking about that experience. That's more of a story arc, and a journalist will look at that and say, yeah, I can work with that. Other things that you can do is, take publicly available data that's out there and incorporate it in the release. So if you have a logistics software solution that you just introduced, you can talk about the fact that, say, 67% of new transportation companies fold in the first 5 years because they can't get their cost under control. And our software immediately addresses that. And it's like, oh, okay, I get that. And then you also tailor it with a use case study where this company was losing 7% a year and they started using your product. And at day 90, it looked like by the end of the year, they would achieve a 3% net profit, which is incredible for a company that's never been profitable before. And so, and then you have that great quote by them. Oh, wow. All of a sudden, what was just a product launch is now a story. It's got events, it's got drama, it's got a climax, all of these elements that journalists are looking for. And those are the types of things. The types of releases that I also see are new hires. And unless it's an executive or an industry veteran, most of the time I would suggest that you don't send that over the wire. Take the headshot of the new hire, write a few sentences, send it directly to your local paper, send it to a trade publication. And most of the trade publications do have an on the move section, and there's an email address for just submitting that. And 80% of the time, as long as yours fits the format and they have the room, they'll just include it. And so that's probably the best case scenario of sending it out over the wire, but you don't have to spend all that money. And, and you don't even have to bother to even write a press release to send out for something like that. I do think that, looking at press releases, I would be the first to admit that a lot of press releases fail. I would say probably 97% of press releases don't generate earned media.
Really?
But the thing that I've done, because I do 10,000 releases a year, is I look at those 3% of releases that do get picked up, and I notice the patterns that exist in there, and I share that with my customers. As a matter of fact, I have a free masterclass. It's very short. It's less than an hour. And it's available at eReleases.com/plan, PLAN. And it goes through strategic types of releases, the 3% that I see get picked up again and again, and what are those patterns. And if you build a PR campaign of 6 to 8 releases, and that's another thing I always tell people is if you're going to try press releases, don't try one. It's like, posting one ad on Google and getting 10 clicks and saying, we ain't getting sales. So, paid advertising doesn't work. You have to do several releases, and the proper PR campaign is usually 6 to 8. You don't have to do them at once. You can spread them out over a year, even a little bit longer if you need to. But what you're really looking for are 6 different strategic approaches to generating media for your business. Now, if you have important milestones coming up over a year, try to incorporate those into that and build them out, follow that story arc. But, things that you may not take into consideration when doing a press release that will give you an edge is like, telling your story. Everybody that appears on Shark Tank opens with their story, and many times it's them being vulnerable. They're sometimes it can be inspirational, but it's usually sharing something that's usually a setback, like they got laid off or they lost a loved one. And them and their father used to have a hobby of doing this thing, and they're like, well, maybe I could turn that into a business or something like that. And the reason that these stories are so valuable is it cuts through all the corporate junk and really gets you to care about them. It gives you that immediate empathy. It humanizes them. And this human interest element is very important. And so, that's one of the strategic types of releases, is focusing on your journey. Now, if it's been a while, and you don't feel you can lead with that story, that's fine. You can take that product launch and then later on in the release talk about your story. There's also a boilerplate section that usually gets recycled in every press release, and you'll recognize it's usually the last paragraph, and above it says about company or about person or something like that. And that's a place where you can incorporate your story and things like that if you don't feel you can lead with that in a press release. But it really is a valuable way to sort of cut through and get people to care about you. And I've read so many blog posts and articles over the last few years about Indiegogos and Kickstarter campaigns, and they share this one person's journey of how they wanted this one thing so similar to what's out there, but it had to do this, and none of them did. And they just like, well, maybe I can get them to someone else to incorporate it. And he got turned away, and all of a sudden he's like, well, how hard would it be for me to do this? And all of a sudden you're like rooting for this person, following their little journey. And that's the power of story and storytelling. And so look for ways to incorporate that into your press release. And another thing that I always tell people, especially if they feel like this, they've got one last press release in them, is to do a survey or study within about that's within their industry. And so when you think about it, when you do a survey or study, it really elevates you, because you're all of a sudden you're taking the reins as a thought leader in your industry. And so you build out a few questions, ask meaningful, timely questions that people would want to know the answer to today. Be creative, ask your spouse, ask coworkers, network with other people in your industry, like saying, do you have any questions right now? If you could just ask others in our industry, what would it be? And sometimes it's things that your media may be ignoring. They're like, well, I've really felt like money's tightening up, net 30s, turning into net 60 and 90 with all these excuses and slow pays. And, it seems like something's afoot. And so, that's one question you could ask about, people's revenue. Is it tightening up? Are they finding trouble collecting money? Another could be like work culture. Seems like we're out of this pandemic for a few years, but people don't want to go back to the way it was. They want to telecommute. They want to work from home. They don't want to put a suit on anymore. I was walking this weekend and I went by one of these suit stores that I've always seen, and I was like, ooh, I bet that they're hurting, because even the people who've gone back to work have been very reluctant to put the tie and jacket back on.
Don't want to do it anymore.
And I was talking to a friend of mine who's a banker, and he goes, we just get shipments of these polo shirts now. And he goes, I love it, because I used to have to wear a coat and tie. And so there's questions around that. There may be stuff that's trending in your industry that's a little bit more specific. But, I say pick like 12 to 16 questions. I like those kinds of numbers, because I usually do 4 questions per page in SurveyMonkey. And that way, if they stop halfway, you still have half their responses. And I weight it by putting the most intriguing and interesting ones, I think, up front. And then I take that link, and then I go approach a trade association in my industry. And this is what I coach my clients. In every industry, there are small and independent trade associations. You're going to want to avoid the big ones, the ones that everybody knows. But the smaller ones, nobody knows about them. I did a podcast once with a PR professional, and she said, well, Mickie, we couldn't do that in our industry because there's only Public Relations Society of America. And I had to break it to her. There's 470 some more trade associations in the United States that are for the PR, public relations, and publicity business. And she never knew. And I said, some of them are completely not appropriate, like Florida only or Mid-Atlantic. But there are some that are like practices of 50 and less employees. Well, that's pretty much everybody except probably the big dozen PR firms that are out there. I feel like that would be very representative of the market. So you go to that association and you just say, hey, could you send this link to your members? I'm looking to get at least 100 responses. And in exchange for that, I'll mention you in a press release I'll be issuing over PR Newswire in the near future. they never get publicity. Nobody knows about them. They see this as a win-win. They're like,
It's a
ooh,
winning
we can
opportunity.
eke out a little publicity for ourselves here.
Yeah.
About 2/3 of the time, the first trade association we go to says yes. And, and if you don't get the 100 responses, if it's close, I don't worry about it. But if it's not, I circle back to them and say, hey, could you push this out again, email or social media or both? Because we really need to get that 100 number for the survey to work with you in mind. And they want it to succeed usually at that point. And that's pretty much it. You look at the survey. SurveyMonkey makes it pretty useful to analyze the data, and with that, you're going to say, what's the biggest surprise here? What would intrigue anybody in our industry the most out of all the questions and responses here? And you're going to focus on that one question and answer in the press release, but you're going to put all the questions and answers on a page on your website, and build it out with as much data and quotes as you can. In the press release you're going to write to go out over the wire, you're going to put an amazing quote in there. You're going to provide some analysis of why the numbers skewed a particular way. For example, AI is really hot. Maybe you asked, do you believe AI is going to replace your job in 5 years? And maybe 83% said yes. And you could say, hey, while I don't agree that 83% of these people are going to be pushed out of their job in the next 5 years, I do believe that those that don't learn how to use AI as a tool are going to be at a serious disadvantage, and they themselves may find themselves without a job. But it's a way to just make yourself sound really good and smart, and you provide a little bit of analysis, and then go back and look at that quote. And is there a way I could beef it up, make it stronger, more powerful verbs, things like that? You really want your quote to sing, because a journalist sees a great quote, they know they can write a great article around it, even if the rest of the press release is pretty soft. So, keep that in mind. But there's so many ways to be strategic with press releases. And unfortunately, like I said, 97% of the people out there are looking at what their competitors doing. And they're doing the types of press releases that aren't really meaningful and not really moving the needle. It's also the same thing with AI. People always go, can I use AI to write a press release? And the first thing I say, I say, sure, you certainly can. AI writes pretty well, but what it can't do is give you an idea for a press release, because it's been trained on the 97% of releases that fail, and it will come back with one of these soft ones. So you come to it with a strategic idea, and the way I approach it is, I'm like, I have this idea for a press release. How would you structure that? And then it gives you the template. And then I would say, write 10 headlines on, different varied headlines on this subject. And in between each headline, stop and think for a minute and say, how can I make this next headline a little bit more strategic and differentiated from the previous one? Whenever I tell AI to slow down and stop for a few seconds or a minute, it never does. It might slow down a little bit, but it does give you a much better answer. It's like if you ask for 20 headlines, it'll spit them out, and they'll all be a variation of the first one. But if you ask it to stop, pause, and reconsider the previous headline, and say, what can I do to make it more distinct, stronger, and differentiated, it will, and you'll get a list that is much better. And so that, and the reason that I like using AI as a bridge with press releases is because so many people get weirded out with writing, and they feel so terrible about it. So I'm like, sure, lean on it, because the end product isn't the press release. So you're not going to get dinged for having AI copy. The journalists are going to redraft it and rewrite it, and in their own language. So you just want to make sure the press release reads well, and that a human could easily understand it. And at least with the latest iteration of ChatGPT 4.0, I find, no problem there. So as long as you don't rely on it to be strategic, and you're just relying on it to write, do it. And another thing, approaching it paragraph by paragraph, you can actually say, I don't really care for the third paragraph. Could you give me 3 different variations? And so it's a really great way to just at the end of it have a better product. Where if you just say write a 600-word press release on this subject, it will do it. And I feel like everything was written by a C+ student. But if I get AI to stop and consider and break it down paragraph by paragraph, I get like a solid B, sometimes a B+ press release out of it.
Yeah, you know, that's so true because you have to give it direction. That's what I tell people. You got to give ChatGPT direction, and you can also ask it to build on it and make it stronger. You know, one of the things I think when it comes to press releases today is that I don't even think people know how to structure a press release. That's why we would go to AI to say, hey, what is the structure of a press release? And one of the questions I want to ask you, can you use press releases, because you said this too, to build your thought leadership like journey? You know what I mean? To look at you as an industry leader and stuff like that. Can you use that for that?
I mean, absolutely. The survey one is definitely going to escalate you and make you a thought leader. And you know, there's other approaches as well. If it's towards the end of the year, provide like your top 10 forecast for the industry for the next year, or predictions or something like that. You know, sometimes doing a roundup of you know, like in my space, PR and press releases. If I did a top 10 PR books that you know, a new college graduate should consider entering the PR industry, or even podcasts, you know, top 10, top 20. Here's a little secret about the podcast one. I've done a few sessions with Podfest over the years, and one of them was like, really, you know, do look at you know, using press releases for podcasts. And what I found is that it's really hard for a podcast to get pick up. You know, the two big exceptions was, surprisingly, there was one. It was a mini series, limited series podcast on Abraham Lincoln that seemed to get picked up. A lot of like PBS stations and affiliates and NPR and stuff like that. And the other one was that lawyer for Trump that is now against
Michael
him.
Cohen,
he did one where he was interviewing Stormy Daniels, and so that one got picked up everywhere. People magazine, all the places. Outside of that, I didn't see it move the needle very much, but I do see a lot of specialty publications and trades, and even some newspapers that will do a roundup of, say, top 10, top 25 podcasts in a particular industry. And what I found to be a really good hack is, if you have a podcast, maybe it's new, maybe it's been around, but you're not well known, but maybe you're in a very specialized niche, like maybe you're a podcast for architects. You could do a top 10 podcasts for architects and insert yourself as podcast number 7, and surround yourself with the best of the best podcasts who cover architects. Any journalist who looks at that will do a little bit of due diligence and say, this is a good list. I've looked at 2 or 3 of the podcasts, or I know several of these podcasts. They're just going to copy and paste the whole thing and run with it. It's a great way for you to get incorporated in there.
Yourself in there.
I call that the Trojan horse approach.
Yes, I like it. I like that, because today you brought press releases back to storytelling. And I like the fact that even with social media and everything that's happening today, we can't hide behind brands anymore. Like, if you're a brand, you can't hide behind a brand. We want to know the story, you know? So I like the fact that you talked about telling that story in that press release in order to try to get picked up, and having that, I guess you emphasize that personal touch in your service, right?
Yes.
And you need to have that personal touch and stuff like that, and add that personal thing in order to capture people today. Because you're right, back in the day, it was just more so like facts and data. This is it. This person's doing this. This is where we're going to be. This, and this. But now, because like you said, so many people are not good at storytelling. Is there any other advice you can give people on how to tell a great story, or either how to tell their story, like a simple way of telling their story?
Well, I think just talking about it and sharing it, and feel free to embellish a little. I mean, that's part of human history. We've all done it.
It's called manifestation.
You know, there's always the the story where you went hunting and you got spooked because you saw a bear. Well, all of a sudden that bear looked you in the eye, and and you knew, and there's elements that you add to it. It's just human nature to do that. So feel free to embellish and share, a little bit more. I moved from writing press releases to that telecom company and had the idea for eReleases, but it wasn't like as easy as I tell it. It sort of evolved and became something that I wanted to do. And I had to look back, and I've made the story a little bit, more interesting and a little more simple, because it was a lot more complicated. And life is generally like that. But, look for those things like your story. Maybe you don't feel like you have a story, but what was going on when you started your business? And like, well, a lot of times we're not even conscious of it. It's like, well, my mom died. And it's like, well, tell me about your mom. And my mom was my biggest supporter and everything, but she always wanted me to find a safe job, and she didn't want me to work for myself. But then she passed away, and that's kind of interesting that I started my business after she died. And it's like, no duh. You finally had permission to go out there and do your own thing, because you knew mom would be a little bit disappointed. But it also meant that because of that, you wanted to make sure it succeeded. And all of that all of a sudden seems like, ooh, and is it 100% true? I don't know, because the human brain is such that we're so complicated. But it is, I believe it is, that if your mother was always telling you, just find a safe job and sit behind a desk and don't try to go out and, make your own ways, because you'll probably fail. And then then she passes and you do create that. I think that there was something there that you probably aren't even consciously aware of it. So talk to your loved ones, talk to your family, ask people to share interesting things that were going on around the time that you were starting your business. And you'd be surprised that unconsciously you were probably influenced by 2 or 3 different things you never thought about, and things that were probably kind of interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Let me ask you this. Do you think that your background in writing poetry, does that help with your kind of creativity when it comes to crafting and storytelling?
100%, 100%. Because when I talk to people like this, they're just like, it seems so natural for you, but for me, it's not. And I'm like, it's just the way I'm wired.
Yeah.
And it is like my superpower. And I respect that. But that's why I share it. That's why I have that master class where I try to give back and get people to go through these exercises and try to think of ways in which they can sort of be more strategic and think a little bit more outside the box. So many people, I hate this term. Over 10 years ago, the term newsjacking came out.
Yeah.
And it was just like, hey, if there's a trend, just join it. And I had a customer call me that had done several releases. They were in the security space. It had been about a couple of weeks since Target had a credit card breach announcement. And I'm just like, let's go look on the wire. So I showed him. I said, I think there's over 1,400 press releases here from other little security companies that are just trying to join the fray. And I said, so that means that maybe there's 50 articles out there, and they're going to have to be split between 1,400 people. So your odds are not good. So I told him, I said, do you have a contrarian viewpoint? And he goes, I don't know. What's that? I'm like, do you have a way of saying something that goes against what all of these security consultants are saying? And he's like, well, maybe. And I was like, well, talk to me. And he's like, well, most of my customers are like mom and pop stores, like the individual dry cleaners that doesn't have any other locations, or the pizza shop that might have 2 or 3 locations. They're not big franchises or anything. So they're not hooked up in a way that all the data is in the cloud and all this stuff. It's, it's very simple. And because these terminals are given to them by the merchants, they're pretty protected because the merchants are the ones controlling the data. And he's like, so for most mom and pop shops, they don't have to worry about this. And I was like, ooh, I like that. So we put together a press release about that says, hey, are you a small business and concerned about the Target credit card breach? Relax, you have nothing to worry about. And it's like, whoa. And so, we put that together, and he got picked up about 8 or 9 places. It wasn't a lot, but the thing is, because he was a contrarian, he could be put in every article that's written about it. I mentioned there was 50 that I thought he could have been put in all 50, because he was the only one that raised the hand and said, I have the con side to this. And as a journalist, you're supposed to be fair and balanced and show both sides. And if only one person is willing to share the other side, you could potentially be put in every article that's written about it. And I think that in his case, he didn't want to put a very strongly worded quote in there. And I felt like if he had really grabbed them, in a way that was sort of a little bit shocking and provocative, I think he could have gotten a little more juice out of it. But you also have to write press releases that you're comfortable with. And he wouldn't have been comfortable with that. So, but like I said, he still got really great outcome, and it went counter to newsjacking. It's the be the contrarian, but be the rational contrarian. I had one guy that took that advice and called me and said, "Mickie, all my customers are mad at me." And I said, "Why?" "Because I took a contrarian viewpoint you recommended." I said, "Really?" I said, let's look at every note I gave you. It's like, do not alienate your existing customer base. And he goes, "Oh, I must have skipped that one." So he knew how to rattle some cages, but he was also rattling some of his own customers. So
that is too funny. Tell me, what are some of the benefits of using eReleases versus kind of doing those one-off distributions yourself? As a person who want to write press releases, you just do them yourself. What are some of the benefits for us to use your service?
So, being on the wire, PR Newswire, the oldest and largest wire, is really powerful. If you visit the website eReleases.com and click on case studies, our first case study is one that we helped out, a very short-lived grassroots effort during the pandemic to help restaurants that were closed during the pandemic. And we got over 100 articles by just hitting send on the wire. And so that's the real value of the wire. It is possible we got picked up in a lot more places because there were so many small daily papers that we would continue to find, but we stopped counting at 100. But we got picked up in all the big places too. And it generated over $10 million in revenue for local businesses. And the way it worked was you contacted them or called them, and a volunteer, you would tell them, "Hey, we have this lovely restaurant we go to our every anniversary. Here's the name of it. Could we support them?" They'll say, "We'll get back to you." If they got a hold of the restaurant, so we have someone who wants to donate some money, it's you give them a gift certificate. If you open it back up eventually, that's the hope. But that was it. So if they got a hold of them, they'd call you back. You would give the $50, went directly to the restaurant. And it's just a lot of little small transactions that added up to over $10 million. And that just shows you that if you have something that's really engaging and newsworthy, it can really go powerful and wide. That one did so well, I think, because we were in a period of negativity and unknown. We're sent home 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and we don't know what's going on. And I think that was one reason that the newspapers and media outlets really resonated with it. Such a powerful, positive thing. And then the second thing was, I think that it was actionable. We felt powerless at home. Here was something, even if it was $25 or $50, we could make a difference, and we could make a difference locally. And those are the types of things that can potentially happen when you go over PR Newswire or any wire, like Business Wire or PR Newswire, because it's available to so many people. And if your message fits, it can go way wider than you could do yourself. I mean, I couldn't have contacted all 100 plus publications in any amount of time that would have been very quick. And all of this happened within just a matter of a few days.
That's so awesome. I'm going to bring this show to a close, Mickie, but I want to ask you, what trends do you see happening in the media and public relations that, small business owners or startups should kind of be aware of?
I think that there is so many positive things about being in a cancel culture, but I think that sometimes if you make a misstep, people can come at you really fast and overwhelm you. And I've seen some people don't know what to do, so they just cut off their comments and walk away. And so I think that you have to sort of think about, how am I going to approach if something ever happened, like an employee said something stupid, or something was taken out of context, or something like that. So that's one thing that worries me a little bit. The other thing is, I just see all these great opportunities. I just love the fact that social media is finding press releases and finding them worthwhile it's a huge, great avenue for media to utilize the wires. I have a love-hate relationship with the fact that there's only 2 real wires of press releases in the U.S. The one is that if you use it, that the journalists are using it because they're really only fishing in 2 places. The downside is only being 2 places, which is basically a duopoly. You're paying a lot more. And the third thing I think is video. I think that we're not there yet. But you can be at the front of the list to start incorporating some really great video. Maybe have some quotes that you have on video. Everybody does the B-roll, and the B-roll is great, but I think that incorporating you reading, say, the quote in the press release, or maybe talking a little bit more and incorporating the quote into it, I think will probably give people a motivation to maybe be among the first to start incorporating using video. But I am excited about that because I feel like it's a natural progression, and I certainly want to be there at the forefront of it.
Yeah, that's so cool. Do you believe AI is probably going to get a bigger role?
I think possibly. I think possibly. I worry if journalists start relying on AI to pull stories, press releases, because all of a sudden it's like, how do we get through the filters of AI and stuff like that? But I don't think we're there yet. But I do think that AI is a really good tool for writing, especially if you're not very competent with it. But don't trust it with coming up with the ideas for the release, and don't ask it to write the press release. Ask it to write the template, and then pick it piece by piece all the way down, paragraph by paragraph, and have it write it that way. And stop along the way, have it rewrite paragraphs you don't like, have it give you variations and things like that. And again, you can have it write a quote, but I'd go back in there and I would beef the heck out of it up. I would make it strong. The quote is probably the second most important part of a press release, with the headline being the most important.
Oh, that's so awesome. Mickie, this was good. I got to bring you back, first of all. Okay.
Sounds good.
Because I feel like you talk a lot more about this, because I feel like people don't have this PR strategy in their business. You know what I mean? Especially when they're starting out. So, but thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah. And one thing to keep in mind is that a lot of people feel that PR is, something that belongs to large companies.
Yeah.
And
they do.
The truth of the matter is that journalists don't get accolades when they cover the big giant companies, because everybody knows them in your industry. But when they put the spotlight on a new tool or a new service that no one knows about, that's when they get the appreciation. And that's when people come back and say, oh, great story. So being small is actually one of your advantages, and being unknown, even if you're a mom and pop or this is a side business, don't let that deter you, because they will gladly shine the light on you regardless of your size.
Yeah, and make sure you use eReleases to do it. All right, guys. Thank you so much, Mickie, for being on the show. All right, guys, listen, I'm Shani Sanders, and this is the Girl Take No podcast, and I will talk to you next time.